Good afternoon and welcome to Inside Entrepreneurship, a webinar series hosted by the Georgetown Entrepreneurship Initiative, the Georgetown Entrepreneurship Alliance, and the Georgetown University Alumni Association. Thank you for taking time out of your day to connect virtually with fellow Hoyas for today's conversation, Leadership in Crisis, with Doug Knopper and Jeff Reid. Our host, Jeff Reid, is the founding director of the Georgetown Entrepreneurship Initiative and professor of entrepreneurship at Georgetown University's McDonough School of Business. As Georgetown's entrepreneurship programs have grown under Reid's leadership, the school has been ranked among the best in the world for entrepreneurship by the Financial Times, Bloomberg Businessweek, and others. Reid is a catalyst for entrepreneurship, economic development, and a well-known leader in entrepreneurship education. I'm Kelly Young, Associate Director of Strategic Engagement in Alumni Relations, and I'll be facilitating today's webinar. Before we get started, I'd like to share a few tips and reminders. This conversation is being recorded. The recording will be made available on our YouTube channel, and you will receive the recording link in a follow-up email. Jeff and Doug will reference a digital handout today. That document can be found within the Handouts section of your GoToWebinar control panel. Jeff and Doug will also take questions at the end of their discussion. Please send in your questions as you have them using the questions section of the webinar control panel. If you're having any technical difficulties or other issues, please submit those concerns to me via the questions section of the control panel. Without any further ado, I'm pleased to turn things over to Jeff.
Thank you very much, Kelly. I'm excited to be here. Welcome to our audience to Inside Entrepreneurship. So just a couple of comments at the front end here. This is the first in our series. We hope you'll join us again 2 weeks from today and every 2 weeks. Our June 3rd session will feature Robert Seidler, who's the co-founder and a lead partner at Seidler Equity Partners. And we'll have a conversation about the golden rule of business crises. And after that, we'll continue to have these sessions every 2 weeks for the rest of the summer and perhaps longer. This is sponsored again by the Georgetown Entrepreneurship Initiative and Georgetown Entrepreneurship Alliance. We encourage you to take a look at these websites, learn more about what both of these organizations do in partnership to build a great entrepreneurial community for Georgetown. We do believe that entrepreneurship is one of the most powerful forces for good in the world, and we encourage all of our Georgetown community to think entrepreneurially and go out and build the world that you believe that we should all have. So now is a great time to be an entrepreneur. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. All right, so before we dive in and I introduce Doug, we want to learn a little bit more about our audience. Just a couple of quick poll questions. And we'll ask my colleagues to launch the first poll question here and encourage our audience to just give us your answers here. We just want to learn a little bit more about who is out there with us. All right, so we have the first poll. We want to know, the first question is, are you an entrepreneur, CEO, or business owner? Do you want to someday be an entrepreneur, or you expect to never be an entrepreneur? And yeah, please, everyone, just take your best shot and give us a vote here. Excellent. Okay, and here we can see our results. About half of our folks here are entrepreneurs and business owners and CEOs. We really appreciate you giving us that information. It's good to know. Okay, we'll ask our second and last poll question of this session. And the next one also asks a little bit about you. We want to know, are you a current Georgetown student, an alum of Georgetown University, or neither of these? Looks like our audience is the vast majority alumni, which is great. That makes a lot of sense, especially matches up with the folks being business owners and CEOs too. So, all right. Looks, yeah, 91% alumni. Okay, great. So let's now move on, and I'm excited to bring in my partner in this session here, Doug Knopper. He graduated from Georgetown with an MBA in 1985. He went into a career in advertising, maybe a more traditional career early on, where he was helping to create campaigns to sell tires and toothpaste and other exciting products like that. But Doug took a career shift during the dot-com boom and took a lower paying job, took some significant risk, moved his family to California and joined DoubleClick. And at the time, DoubleClick was the advertising company of the internet age. Within a few months, the company started laying off hundreds and hundreds of employees. Doug was one of the last ones standing and took a greater and greater leadership role in the business, became an internet expert in growing companies. In 2007, he started a new company called FreeWheel and sold it 7 years later, I believe, to Comcast. And FreeWheel was again building on the advertising business, and it connected digital ads to all those videos that we now watch. I think 2 years ago, over 2 billion ads a day were served through FreeWheel technology, which I think was more trades than were on the New York Stock Exchange in any given day. So Doug has led companies. He's been the CEO, a director, a leader. He now runs a business called CEO Hacker, in which he coaches CEOs on how to lead their businesses. And he's also the vice chair of the Georgetown Entrepreneurship Advisory Group. So with that, I want to thank you for joining us, Doug, and I'm going to turn it over to you to lead us through some of your advice for entrepreneurs and CEOs.
Thanks, Jeff. Good memory on what we've talked about recently. And also, but you did forget that I'm also now parent 24. So that's a new addition.
That's very important. That's right. Thanks.
Hi, everybody. Good to see you. What do you say in this kind of call? Good to know that you're in the room, whatever it is. Anyway, welcome and glad to talk about this. Over the past kind of couple of months, I've come to the conclusion, or it's become apparent to me that, I've been through some of these crises. One of the I guess benefits of being an old entrepreneur is you've been through crisis after crisis. And so I started putting together a lot of notes and thoughts sort of at the beginning of this. And this is the third presentation that I'll be making across the last couple of months of what's been happening in here. And just as a quick note of intro, what Jeff mentioned is CEO Hacker. It's not, I wouldn't exactly call it a business. It's more of a hobby right now where I put together a bunch of thinking and a bunch of thoughts. And I'm on a couple of boards and I do a lot of consulting and a lot of advisory work with companies. And this is sort of where it's my note collection where I try and maintain a bunch of thoughts of what's going on. So we'll give you a link to this stuff. But just quickly, let me put out some thought starters of where I see right now where business and where entrepreneurship is in this kind of in the progression of the current crisis that we're in. I'll lay down a lot of very quick thoughts, and then Jeff, you and I think we'll just have an open conversation about that. So if you go to the next slide, please. Okay, so in my opinion, we are in roughly the third month of this crisis, and we are now entering or well within the third phase of this crisis. The first phase in March was, the holy crap, the stock market's crashing, I'm in a panic, what the hell am I gonna do? And if you owned a company, it was, do I have to lay off people? Do I have to get rid of my leases? Do I have to shut my business down? I had conversations with CEOs that were, just incredibly gloomy and doomy on what am I going to do. The second phase pretty much coincided with the month of April, which is, okay, I have a plan in place. I know what I'm going to do to survive. I know what layoffs I'm going to do. I know, what customers we're going to keep, what we're not going to keep. A lot of companies shut down office space, things like that. But plans started to come into place and boards and things started to coalesce. The payroll program loans started to come in and people started to at least get a sense of, I'm going to survive and here's what survival, at least in the short term, is going to look like. We are now well into the month of May and we are about to enter the third phase or kind of a precursor, an intro to the third phase, which is what is re-entry going to look like? What is the world going to look like? And this graphic is from the state of California, which came out with their kind of 4 stages of how we're going to open the economy and the business world to people. And so we're now entering in California stage 2, and I think you'll see at some point stage 3 and stage 4 possibly going backward from time to time, but we're definitely in that new phase. Now, what's different as we enter this new phase from kind of previous crises that I've been through and the world has been through, Jeff, if you go to the next slide, is that the world, or kind of the business world, is not being guided by government. It's not being guided particularly by the federal government. If anything, it's being guided by businesses. Now, state governments, this doesn't break it out between state and local. We'll talk about that in a second. But for the most part, CEOs and businesses are now responsible for determining what it's going to look like, how we're going to operate, how our businesses are going to open, and what we're going to need to do. And if you go to the next slide, Jeff, that this, well, I mentioned it's not coming, regardless of what your political sort of viewpoints are, the federal government is not providing the leadership on what should happen at the state and local level. Governors are providing it, but by far it's coming from businesses. And you've seen a lot of this from the CEOs of Slack and the CEOs of various companies, Twitter and so on, that are talking about what our policies are going to be and how we're going to respond to these things, and what it's going to look like in our company. And so what I've written on the next few slides, and I'll take you through those very quickly, is, you know, things that CEOs should be talking about as you start to think about what does it look like to re-enter the workspace and reopen our businesses. So I've divided this into kind of 3 categories. Let's start with workspace. And these are, I'm not going to spend any time on these other than to point them out. The things that you need to think about before opening a workspace. What are your social distancing rules? Can desks be next to each other? Can you have open cubicles? Can you jam people into conference rooms like we used to? You know, at least here in California and Silicon Valley, you have, you know, everybody has open offices, and then you'll have a kitchen and, you know, M&M jars where everybody reaches in. What's okay to have and what's not okay to have? Are we even allowed to have food in the kitchen anymore? Who cleans those common areas, the bathrooms, the elevators, the conference rooms? How often do they get cleaned? And more specifically, what about the things that you touch? Touch screens and shared laptops in conference rooms, light switches, phones that people may use for conference calls, doors, elevator buttons, the front door knob to your office, things like that. Who's responsible for cleaning that? How often does it clean, and how do we know that that happened? If somebody does get infected in your office, you know, what's the policy for that? Who's going to clean up the place and make sure that we authorize that it's been decontaminated? Who's going to tell the building management so other offices in the space are aware of that? And how are we going to tell other employees, like, hey, maybe we don't want you to come back this week. Maybe we need to, you know, let the office decontaminate for a little while. That you don't want, if the office is decontaminating, you don't want people to show up the next day. How many people in total are allowed in the office? Are visitors allowed in? Are clients allowed in? Are family members allowed in? What about food deliveries? What about, you know, paper and, you know, stuff for the bathroom and things like that? Who's going to let that come in, and who's going to be in charge of that? So there's a lot of these things that need to be worked through just in terms of your physical workspace. The next area that I would look at in terms of kind of policies and things are just kind of the rules of the road. When are we going to reopen? What day? September 1st, August 1st, July 1st? Who's going to show up? Is it just a free-for-all and everybody's allowed to show up, or, you know, A through K are coming on Monday and Wednesday, and L through Z come in the other days? You know, what are our hours? Are we working 9 to 5? Do I have to wear a mask in the office? What are my work from home rules? You know, if I don't have childcare, or I can't send my kid to school, is that a legitimate reason to work from home, and am I allowed to continue doing that? What's the definition of a sick day? I mean, in this new world, you want to encourage people, if you're not feeling well, take a damn sick day. Do not come into the office, stay home. You want to encourage that. But if you have a limited number of sick days and, you know, you are worried that you're going to run out of them, maybe we need to rethink that policy. Same for vacation days. You know, working from home, at least I've found, is a much more 24/7 sort of operation, and I kind of want people to take more vacation days. I know a number of companies are forcing mandatory 2 days off. You must take 2 days off every month now, and I think that's completely legitimate. But at the same time, at least in client-oriented businesses, how do you meet the clients? How do internal teams come together? This can't go on forever where we don't meet people. What's our travel policy? Of a company that I work with that does TV shoots, and to do a TV shoot, you sort of have to fly out there, and they're currently, actually right now, driving 2 motorhomes cross country to go do a TV shoot in California. That's not sustainable. That's not going to work forever. And then things like, it used to be that we encourage people to take mass transit. Here's commuter checks and things like that. I'm not totally sure that that's what we want to encourage anymore. I think it might be that we want to encourage people to drive by private car, and maybe we want to pay for them to park in the parking garage or something like that. So all these things need to be thought about in policy. And that leads to, kind of another area. On the next slide, Jeff. There we go. Which gets into more regulatory and legal and financial things. I talked about vacation and sick days. Well, those all have implications on finance. You have to accrue those. So if we give unlimited or much larger number of vacation and sick days, what's that going to do to your balance sheet? That needs to be thought through, and a CFO or finance person needs to be thinking about that. Are we insured for health liabilities? This is a huge unanswered question that I've not heard much discussion about right now, is who's responsible? If you have somebody in the office that gets somebody else sick and you can track it to that one person, is that person liable? Are you in the office liable? Who's going to get sued? And are we insured for that? What if an employee declares this workplace is unsafe or unclean or unsanitary or something like that? Do you have a system in place that we're going to allow for that kind of viewpoint to come through? Feels fairly, not problematic at a 10 or 20-person office. What if you have a 1,000-person office? Is there a designated safety coordinator for your workplace? In California, we have designated earthquake coordinators. You have one person that's responsible for, if there's an earthquake, making sure everybody gets out and you have a count and things like that. Are we going to have that equivalent in our offices? What about privacy and confidentiality rights? Are we allowed to track these things? Are we allowed to, ask people questions? Do you feel sick? Is anybody in your family sick? Are you allowed to take employees' temperatures? Now, all of these are unanswered questions. And going back to my sort of original topic, I don't think we're going to get guidance, at least for a long time, from government officials. Maybe at the state level, possibly at the local level, but certainly at this point, no pattern of getting that from the federal level. And so let me kind of leave you with what I think are sort of the best practices that I see coming up. Jeff, on the next slide. I think that this is an opportunity for particularly entrepreneurial smaller companies to gain a competitive advantage at being a best-in-class workplace. And I think that the best companies will have an office nurse or a health tech or somebody that's available in the office or maybe in the building to help with these things. And I think it might behoove companies to figure out ways to either hire or contract with somebody that's able to do that. I think companies will expand family care benefits. And by that, I mean both medical care, but also child care or access to child care and other types of health care and mental care benefits. I think, and I'm conflicted on this next one, I think you will see some companies that say we're going to get more real estate, no more with the open office, no more, everybody in the bullpen sharing. We're going to have private offices. We're going to go back to the Mad Men era of the 50s, and everybody's going to be in a private office because that's the best way to sort of quarantine us. The flip side of that is, hey, everybody work from home, like what Twitter said is, where we're cool with y'all working from home. I don't want people in the office. So I'm a little unclear on what's going to happen to commercial real estate and your real estate commitments. But what I do know is that the best-in-class companies will have an active CEO and a leadership team and a board that's focusing on this nonstop. If you as a CEO or a leadership in a company have not been focused on your employee needs and you have either delegated that or relegated that to the head of HR, the head of administration or something like that, that will have to change. The best-in-class companies will have to have a leadership-oriented focus on their employees, and the companies are going to be looking for that. And so the one takeaway that I would say, if you're a CEO of a company, any size company right now, and you are not personally focused on these issues, you better, or your competition will just start hiring your employees and take it over. And so with that, I will turn it back to you, Jeff, and we can talk about any one or all of these things.
All right. Well, thanks, Doug. I really appreciate that. Let me see here. We can stop showing the screen and just have a conversation. And thanks for providing that overview. I know there's so many questions there, and there aren't a lot of easy answers.
No.
What have you seen as you talk to CEOs? What have you seen in terms of who's doing a great job? What are some of the really difficult issues that folks have made a decision on one way or another? And how do you see that playing out?
I have not seen kind of one pattern, and again, particularly here on the West Coast in Silicon Valley, I've not seen sort of one size fits all strategies, but the one best practice that I've seen is open transparency from CEOs and leadership team. And I mentioned Slack is one of the examples and Airbnb as well. Airbnb just laid off about 25% of their staff, which is sad and unfortunate, but understandable at this point. And they did it in such a transparent way. They talked about the rationale for why they were doing it, how they made the selection of the categories of people, obviously not individual people, how they did it. And in my opinion, the one sort of best practice is be transparent, be open at the risk of being overly transparent. I always use the example of when people are waiting for a delayed plane to take off, and you've probably all been in the situation where you're standing at the gate and you're sort of, all standing around waiting for that plane to take off. And what frustrates people more is the lack of information. There's no information, what's happening. At least give us something. And so, when the person, the gate agent comes out and says, look, we don't have any information, but I promise you that every 15 minutes I will give you an update, even if I don't have anything, that feels so much better than nothing. And I think that's a lesson for CEOs is tell people what you're thinking. If you have no information, tell them you don't have any information, but don't say nothing. And that to me that's the one best practice. Just share and be open. Your employees are vulnerable, they're scared, they're worried about their careers, they're worried about their health, they're worried about their families. And the more information and the more sort of transparency you can give them as a CEO, the better they will feel about the company and give you that commitment in return.
Great. So let me ask a question about kind of a little bit of a bigger picture trend that you might see here. So, San Francisco, Silicon Valley, New York, some other cities were kind of the last few years becoming this huge, there's a huge challenge in terms of cost of living and everybody working in these metro hubs. Now lots of companies and lots of people are getting used to this work from home world. Do you see things changing in terms of where companies want their employees to be or where employees are going to be in the when we come out of this and for the near future?
Well, that goes to my real estate question. Look, I think work from home has proved that it can happen. And, particularly in sort of, white collar, non-physical type industries, we can make this happen, work from home. Can we go back to a world where it's 100% or stay in this world where it's 100% work from home and for the rest of time? I think some employees can. I think it will be harder to train new employees, to create a culture for new employees, to sort of, get people all thinking and motivated and incented to work on the same page. It can be done. It will be more challenging for sure. So my personal belief is that in the future, it will have a different real estate and sort of physical layout. Again, I'm torn on what that will be, either bigger or smaller, one or the other. I think work from home will be much more sort of tolerated and perhaps encouraged and possibly mandated at some points in time. But I do believe that, number one, employees are more productive when they have interaction, physical interaction, and they're able to meet as a team beyond the confines of their laptop screen or whatever it is. And I also think that there's a social need. Most people, at least, and certainly in the tech industry, people like to work. They like to go into places. They like that sort of social clubbiness of work. And not everybody, I'm certainly overstating or overgeneralizing, but I do believe that there is a lot of value to that in business. And I think finding the right balance of how many days or hours am I allowed to work from home and how many days do I need to come in and still be safe and still be productive is going to be the calculus. In individual companies, different companies will handle it differently over time.
All right, we got a question from our audience, which is about career choices. There's a lot of people are needing to make new decisions at this point, whether they were looking for a job or trying to start a business. Things may have changed. So earlier in your career, you took a risk, and it worked out well for you. Can you talk a little bit about how you made that decision then, and any advice you have for someone now who's trying to figure out maybe what they should be doing with their career?
Yep. Look, I think there's a lot of schools of thought on this. Number one, in both kind of the 2000, 2001 time period, and then also the 2007, 2008 time period, there have been amazing companies that were built during that time. And part of that came from entrepreneurs who found solutions to things that were taking place in that moment in time, and they were able to use that moment in time to leverage something. That was probably similar to what we did with FreeWheel, although we started it prior to the 2008 recession. I think you also have entrepreneurs or employees or workers who have a lot of time on their hands. Maybe they've been laid off, maybe they've been furloughed, maybe they have fewer hours, and so they have more time to do things, or maybe they sit at home all the time because they can't go out and go to the bar or something like that. And so they have more time on their hands to think through some of these problems. So the short answer is, I do think that these are really interesting times for formation of new ideas and to bring those to market. Sure, it's probably harder to get financing at this point. It's harder to, get the company funded, but it also at the same time a little bit of necessity. Well, if I don't have anything else to do and I don't have a job, or I have a job that's not taking all of my time, I might as well go off and do this. So the timing is really good right now to start a company or to join an early stage company. And my guess is in 2 or 3 years, you will see the fruition of this as some really interesting companies like, Airbnb came around in 2009, I think maybe 2008, and and Uber came around in those times. All the Web 2.0 companies came around in 2001 and 2002. I think you'll see more of that. Is this a good time to leave your high-paying, high-benefits job right now? I'm going to go with probably not. You might want to stick around for a little while longer, unless there's some real incentive not to do that. I think this is a good time if you are lucky enough to have a good job and you're getting paid well. Probably carry on and see things and use your spare time to start that company. But in general, I think that we will look back 2 or 3 years from now, and much like I look back in 2007 and say, why didn't I buy Amazon at 12? You'll see some pretty dramatic changes 2 or 3 years from now from the way the world works today.
Yeah, anytime you see great disruption and change happening, that means there are opportunities, right? And maybe, I think the saying is, it's a good time to start a company in a recession because you have access to talent and maybe you have, lower opportunity costs of your own. It is harder to raise money, right? So that's a big issue.
That's right.
And
actually, that's a great point. Let me play on that for a minute. Up until 3 months ago, every one of my companies that I work with were talking about the fact that it was so hard to hire people. It's so hard to recruit and hire, and it's expensive. I don't have that conversation with people anymore. You want to hire an engineer or a marketing person or a salesperson, they're out there. Just the whole paradigm shifted on that very quickly. And so from purely the point of view of an entrepreneur doing it in the hiring seat, that's a great thing to happen. It's not necessarily a great thing societally, but that's a different issue.
Yeah, and around the whole cash issue, I know that's one of the things you talked about for CEOs and people running businesses. What are some of the techniques you see to manage money, right? You manage your cash flow. That's one of the most important things to figure out when everything is going crazy. So what are some of the things that you've seen companies do well when it comes to managing cash?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, and this is one where I'd say, kind of going back to those 3 phases of the crisis that we're in. Phase 1 was the holy crap, we're in this crisis, what are we going to do? And phase 2 was all the planning of how are we going to survive and thrive. And I spent quite a bit of time with the companies that I work with. First and foremost, companies, if you have raised money, figure out a way to make that money last for at least 12 months, no less than 12 months. And even that feels fairly, too short to me. Make it last for 18 to 24 months. Figure out how you can make that cash last, because who knows how this is going to play out, and who knows what the market is going to look like, both for fundraising, but also for just in general for customers coming back and things like that. So, make that cash last as long as you can. Then go back and look at your current customer base. What are the customers? And again, this is for companies that are a little bit more well established. What are the customer needs that we have for our existing customers, and how can we serve them and make sure that they stay as customers? And this is one where I spent a lot of time with a couple of companies. I had one company that provides kind of a software solution for managing patient relationships for dentist offices. And as you can imagine, in March, that every one of those, their customers came to them and said, whoa, we need out, this isn't working. We're shutting down our dentist office, and what do we do? And what I talked to them about is, give them a couple of months credit. Just credit it. Sure, that will suck for our revenue. That is going to be a terrible thing for the revenue of this company. Not to have, to have to discount or credit back revenue, but get each one of those customers to say, in return for 3 months credit or whatever the number is, 2 months credit, or paying, 50% or something like that, you will extend your contract for 1 to 2 years and have them sign that extension in return for a 3-year credit. Well, when we come out of this crisis in, a month or 2 or 3 or whenever that is, their TCV, their total contract value, when you look at it over the space of a couple of years, will have increased dramatically. They will be a much stronger, much solid, much more stable business on the back end of this crisis just by giving up a couple of months revenue. I would take that bet any day. And I think those are the kinds of trade-offs that you can make, is how can we do that? I think you also look deeply into your customer base and figure out where there are pockets of activity. A company that serves restaurant businesses, talk about a company even more than dentist offices that just went from 100 to 0 in the space of a day. When I talked to the CEO about this, he had a very, very interesting observation a couple of weeks in. Sit-down restaurants and nice restaurants have all died. Nobody goes to them. But pizza chains and fast food, particularly ones that deliver, are doing better than they've ever done before, because everybody's having pizza delivered. We feel like it's safe and it's comfort food and it's hot and all that kind of stuff. And so he sort of focused his energy on increasing the services for the pizza chains and the fast food restaurants and the quick serve restaurants, and he'll survive. That company will survive. It's not going to be pretty, but they will survive.
That's great. We got another audience question on a topic that I know that you really love, and it's related to Georgetown specifically. Being in Silicon Valley and thinking about all the different universities that turn out alumni entrepreneurs. What do you think there is about Georgetown that gives our alumni a competitive advantage when you're thinking about entrepreneurship?
You knew I was going to like this question.
Yeah, I'm glad somebody asked that one for us.
So I am a fan of Georgetown having an entrepreneur program for a whole bunch of reasons, but the main reason that I think Georgetown is uniquely suited to this, actually, let me take this from a different standpoint. There are many, many universities that have entrepreneur programs or disciplines or areas of focus, Stanford being the obvious one, and then a million others. And even out here in the Bay Area, there's Cornell has a West Coast campus and things like that. They all have their entrepreneur programs. Georgetown has not done that for a whole bunch of legitimate reasons. What I think Georgetown has a unique advantage is the ability to teach people to not just be entrepreneurs, but to think entrepreneurially. And if you stop and literally think about that for a minute, being an entrepreneur has a connotation of starting a company, running a company, growing a company. The Stanford approach would be to build a company that sells for multi-zillion dollars, and everybody benefited because we all made $1 billion, and we put out a whole generation of Larry Pages and Mark Zuckerbergs. I think Georgetown is unique in that we can teach our students and our community to think entrepreneurially. How do we make the world a better place? How do we think creatively? How can we create a company for the betterment of X, society, our employees, our customers, whatever? And I think that concept of thinking entrepreneurially, thinking in an entrepreneurial fashion, being not afraid to break rules, being not afraid to make mistakes, being not afraid to, if you need to fire people for legitimate reasons, all those kinds of things, that those principles of thinking entrepreneurially are as relevant to a medical student who will never open a new business, might always work in a hospital or a practice, to a music major who wants to know how to create a, an online program to sell music books or something, I don't know, something like that. But to a classics major, those concepts of thinking entrepreneurially, I think, are much broader than just the narrow focus of let's create a company and let's build that company and let's make a bunch of money. And to me, that is a unique opportunity for Georgetown, with Georgetown's unique perspective on the whole person and on society and leaving the world a better place. I think that's what entrepreneurialism at Georgetown is and should be all about.
That's great. I know we spend a lot of time talking about how, the common cultural perception of entrepreneurs is the young white male who drops out of college, goes to Silicon Valley, raises venture capital, starts a tech company and cashes out after a few years, or continues to be the CEO years later when the company's huge, right? Even though part of that story fits your story, but there's so many other entrepreneurs, right, that are out there doing things, whether it's, it doesn't have to do with tech, it doesn't have to be white males, all those pieces. There's just a huge universe of entrepreneurship and, as you described, being entrepreneurial beyond just starting companies. And
right.
We see so many of our alumni doing great things. I think it's been part of the ethos of our university for a long, long time to try to make it better.
I think there are great examples of the companies the entrepreneurial companies that have been sort of spawned from Georgetown. You have some of the big ones like Sweetgreens, which, while it is, those guys are the definition of great entrepreneurs, but they do things in an environmentally friendly and sustainable way, and I think that's super important. You have a lot of the small companies that have started, like the I forget the name of it, the misfit fruit people, who
That's
are
right.
buying sort of somewhat damaged fruit and turning it into fruit juice. Those are solving world problems, and if we can do that on a real scale, I don't, for the time that I've spent here in the West Coast, I don't see a lot of that coming out of these universities. Those ideas are not maybe big enough or impactful enough for what they're trying to accomplish.
Great. All right, we've got a couple more questions here from our audience. So there's a question around working from home. So you talked about this before, how companies need to be willing to adapt and keep some of their work from home policies going. But I guess that has challenges, right? The question is, how does working from home impact the work product? And how would you manage that as a CEO if your employees are working from home because either they have to or the company prefers that? But there are challenges to that too. How do you manage that as a business owner?
So a number of ways I would answer that question. First of all, I think the jury is out on whether their work product is as good, better, or worse than it is from working in the office. I would say that almost everyone that I talk to that is now in a work from home environment that they had not been in the past has said how much more productive they are, and for a couple of reasons. Fewer distractions from the workplace. Now that I'm going to put a caveat there, we'll come back in a second, but fewer distractions from the workplace. There isn't, Jeff doesn't come knock on your door and knock on your desk and say, hey, let's go out to lunch, or I need you in this meeting, or what do you think about this presentation, or something like that. There's less of that happening, although there are all sorts of opportunities from, we have Slack and we have email and we have text and stuff like that. You can be distracted. So I don't think that I think productivity tends to be higher working from home. You also can work at odd hours. There's no reason now, and I think this is a double-edged sword, right? You can work all hours of the day and night now to get your work done. That's somewhat challenging and maybe a good thing, maybe a bad thing. I'm not totally sure. Whereas in the physical work environment, you usually left the work at the door, or a lot of people did when they left the office at the end of the day. I think it becomes more challenging, particularly if you have little kids and you have to deal with childcare, or you have other responsibilities that you have to manage. That's a challenge, and we as a society are going to have to figure that one out. I'm certainly, as a parent, hoping that school starts in the fall, because I don't want the 18-year-old sitting around the basement any longer than he needs to playing video games.
That's what we call an urgent problem that needs a solution there,
Yeah,
right?
and you notice my lobbying for anybody at Georgetown, I need to get my son out of the house.
All right. We'll do our best. Certainly hope that we can have him here in the fall. All right, so let's see. Next question here. So it goes back to the kind of the values issues. When you have to lay off employees, what advice do you have? You mentioned some things earlier about being transparent, some of those things. Since you've been a part of this a few times in your career, what advice do you have for somebody that has to lay off a group of employees, maybe hasn't done it a lot of times before?
So I will start by saying there is never a time when you have to lay off an employee, whether it's one or a group of them, that it doesn't suck. And I don't care whether you like the person, whether the person is productive, not productive, doing a good job, not doing a good job, fun to be around, not fun around. It is, you are disrupting that person's life. And particularly if that person doesn't see it coming, you are making a material impact in that person that is not necessarily positive for that person. It might be down the road positive, but in the short term it is not. And so anybody that that thinks that it's going to be easy, you have another thing coming. It is never easy. There are definitely things you can do to make it easier. There are sort of rules and guidelines, and you can find those online. There's all sorts of different places on, how the days of the week that it's better to do and how to have the conversation. And it used to be make sure you do it in person. Now that's a little bit harder to do, but it's not an easy thing, and I don't have any good advice. Be transparent, be open, be very direct, and be non-negotiable. Layoffs are, when you go into lay off someone or end that person's employment, it is a final conversation. And I've often seen people try and talk you into, well, what if we did this and what if we did that? And if you've made that decision, it must be final and you must end the conversation. You cannot let it go. So there's advice and on how to make the process easier. It is never an easy or pain-free process, and it shouldn't be. If it starts being pain-free, then you're in the wrong job.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of entrepreneurs talk about this and say, be really slow when you're hiring people, but when the time comes to let someone go, you have to be quick and direct. Yeah, painful, but
and on that note, I mean that's maybe a different note than laying off people, but just in general, every time that I've looked at employees who aren't productive or are a problem for the organization, and I've thought, well, how do we know that we need to get rid of this person because she's toxic to the organization, or she's not doing a good job, or she's causing us problems or something like that. And you often think, well, but maybe our sales will go down, or maybe our customer satisfaction ratings will go down because in the short term, losing this person. I have found that the benefits of making that cut always outweigh the potential negative, and the perceived negative or the perceived fears almost never come. I know of a company that just laid off a lead in the technology group, and everybody was worried that person would take all of these technologists, people that worked for him away. And guess what? Nobody left. Everybody was as relieved as we were when the person left. And so the perceived fears are way worse than the actual outcome.
Yeah, it's one of the more difficult things you have to do, but if it helps the organization survive and thrive, then you're making life better for all the people who continue to be part of the team.
Yep.
It's just one of those tough decisions. All right, so we're getting to the end of our time here. I just want to say it's great to hear your advice. I know being an entrepreneur and a CEO, those are some of the most difficult jobs, but you're making a huge impact. Entrepreneurs are solving problems, creating value, creating jobs. Surviving the tough times is one of the hardest parts, but the good times can be wonderful. Doug, do you have any last words of advice for our audience here who's trying to learn how to manage and be leaders in this sort of a crisis?
Yeah, I have lots of words of advice, probably more than we have time for. I would say, first of all, keep in mind that we will get out of this crisis. We've been through a lot of crises in the history of business, certainly in modern times. In my time, we've been through 9/11, and we've been through 2007, and we've been through 2001. There's a lot of crises that have taken place, and we do we do exit these crises, and you will return to a period of somewhat stability. In this case, I think there will be a new normal that we don't know what it's going to look like or for how long it lasts, but we will come out of this. And so you do want to keep your eye on the ball of what that looks like. I think you will come, the companies that do it right and set up the right programs and the right systems and treat their employees well and treat their customers well will come out of it with a competitive advantage and be much stronger down the road in ways that you hadn't anticipated and maybe wouldn't have been a competitive advantage just 3 months ago, 4 months ago. I think there is money out there to be had. Every VC that I know is still open for business. It's more challenging, and particularly if you don't have a relationship with them, it's more challenging to sort of make that connection. I don't know of any venture capitalist or private equity that has given money to a company that they have never met face to face. I'm still waiting for that one, but there are deals that are being made and are being generated, and so I do think that will happen, and this is the time to maintain those connections.
I heard just this morning, I heard from a venture capitalist, they made their first investment in a company that they had never met face to face. And
interesting.
Their advice was, they'd spent maybe twice as much time on Zoom calls and that sort of interaction than they would, but they missed out on the, visiting the company office and reading all the nonverbal cues and the peripheral kind of things they get. So it is harder to raise money these days, but there are still deals being done.
Yeah.
And for the aspiring entrepreneurs in the audience, there's some out there who are trying to figure out what to do. I think one of the ways that we often advise is try to predict what the future is going to look like. If you take the current turmoil and disruption and change and think about which trends are going to accelerate, which trends are going to completely reverse themselves, do your best to predict the future and imagine what it's going to look like, and then figure out what problems need to be solved to make that happen. If there's one of those problems that's exciting enough for you to explore, that's the way to start on it. Don't just wait for to wake up one morning with a brilliant idea. It's look at trends, look at opportunities, think of what you care the most about, and find problems that other people need to be solved. So with that, let's see. We've got some closing comments here that I'll make. Just want to say thanks so much to Doug for being a part of this. We are going to have another webinar 2 weeks from now, as I mentioned before, featuring Bob Seidler, who has got decades of private equity experience investing in companies over the long run. And please, if you're interested in learning more about entrepreneurship at Georgetown, join us at one of the websites you see here at eship.georgetown.edu or hoyapreneurs.org. We work together to build one big community supporting Georgetown entrepreneurship. Thanks once again to Doug, and thanks again for our audience and for being a part of this. Hopefully we'll see everybody here again in 2 weeks. Bye-bye.